Right, I've got a bottle of cola and I've got some minty sweets. I've never done this before. Please don't do this at home yourselves unless your parents say you can. Let's see what happens when I drop these sweets into this bottle. Right, I'm back indoors and back in the warm. I've got to admit, I was a little bit disappointed with that. I've seen much better ones on the internet where there's been stuff gushing everywhere. It was not to be, but it did get me thinking about reactions. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I've been reading a very cool book called He Never Said by a guy called Steve Chalk. It's probably one for your parents for now, but it is a very good book. Jesus has said a lot of really cool, incredible and life-changing things. The Bible is full of fantastic wisdom, life lessons, great stuff. Sometimes people misinterpret or they misquote the Bible. One of the ones that gets taken out of context a lot, you'll find it in Exodus 21 verse 24, Leviticus 24 verse 40, and Deuteronomy 19 verse 21. It's from back when God was giving people the law in the first place, the 10 commandments and more around all of that. And it says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You may have heard that, you may have seen it on t-shirts and things like that. Some people use that as justification or as an excuse for revenge. Well, he hit me, so I hit him back. Eye for an eye, he had it coming. But it was actually a limit. If someone does something wrong, then absolutely there should be consequences. We can't have people running around breaking the law and there's nothing done about it, because that would be chaos. But the punishment should fit the crime. It's an eye for an eye, no more. Imagine if you got cross with a friend and you hit them, don't do that, and then they hit you back 5 times. That wouldn't be fair, would it? But then along came Jesus and he took this even further. Going to my trusty friend, the Bible, Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 to 2. And this is called the Sermon on the Mount. One day, as he saw the crowds gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him and he began teaching them. Now, I would recommend you read the whole thing because there is, like I said, there's some excellent stuff in there. I'm actually going to skip to verses 38 to 42. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. It's tempting to see this as contradicting the law of the Old Testament, but the truth is, it's actually clarifying the teaching. And if you look back at verse 17, Jesus says, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Over the years, people had lost sight of the fact that an eye for an eye was the maximum penalty and had mistakenly started thinking of it as a mandatory one, or what the law said they had to do. The letter of the law remained, but the spirit had been lost. Now you remember, God gave us these laws to protect us, to keep us safe and to stop us from worrying, not to give us an excuse to go out having revenge. Jesus reminded them and us that this wasn't about revenge. Later on in Matthew chapter 18 verse 22, Jesus said we should forgive each other not 7 times but 70 times 7 times. People were entitled. The law said they could take an eye for an eye, but Jesus encouraged them to be merciful instead. Why? Because mercy and forgiveness are attitudes and actions that bless the person forgiving and the person being forgiven. So not getting revenge and forgiving is good for us. If something bad has been done to us, it is better for us to forgive than to hold on to the anger. And Jesus knew that. Now, you might say, how does going the extra mile benefit anyone? Don't we just end up looking like doormats, letting people walk over us? And Jesus was certainly not a doormat. He stood up for what was right. He defended the weak. He stood for justice and mercy. He was not a doormat. Back in Jesus' time, Roman soldiers were entitled to force anyone they liked to carry their pack for 1 mile, and some of them would do it as bullies just to show that they had that power. They would do it to remind the Jewish people that they were slaves, that they were trapped, and that the Romans had all of the power. By volunteering to go the 2nd mile, they would take that power back. They would take some kind of control back, like, yeah, you can make me carry this for 1 mile, but then I'll carry it for another mile. And suddenly it wasn't a power game anymore. It was, you have no power over me because I will do as I'm told and more. By volunteering to go the 2nd mile, a person could set things on an equal footing, make it clear they were carrying the pack because they chose to, not because they had to. It brought dignity, it brought equality, rather than it being taken away, which would have been the original intent. Nothing doormatty about that. And turning the other cheek. I know the instinct is, if someone hits you, you want to hit back. That's just, it's instinct. It's what we do. In Jesus' day, the safe thing to do, if someone hit you in the face, was keep your head down. Don't make trouble. But the natural thing was to hit back. Jesus urged his followers not to do either, but instead to offer the other cheek. Again, it was a way of retaking control, of refusing to submit, refusing to play by the other person's rules. It was a moral slap in the face rather than a physical one. And it was a very deliberate attempt at peace and reconciliation. And that's what Jesus is all about, reconciling us to God, bringing peace. Turning the other cheek might sound unrealistic, but it's a really positive thing to do. It would help maintain dignity and defiance without resorting to violence or the weapons of war. Now, Roman oppression back in Jesus' time was awful. By turning the other cheek, rather than killing your enemy, you could transform your enemy. You could see something change in them. Now, there is a lot in the news at the moment about Black Lives Matter. We have seen awful, awful things in the news. We've heard awful stories of the way people have been treated, not just recently, but going back centuries. And you might be wondering what to do with that at the moment. And actually, this applies to that now as well. Now, you may well have heard of Martin Luther King. He was around in the 1960s as part of the American Civil Rights Movement, which is not dissimilar. It probably spawned what's happening at the moment as well. At a time of enormous racial tension and violence, daily beatings, discrimination, all sorts of awful things going on, Martin Luther King refused to submit or to strike back with violence. Although they would have morally been entitled for some of the things that were done to them, they were morally entitled to their eye for an eye, for their revenge. But Martin Luther King knew that non-violent resistance was the only way forward. Modelling his approach on Jesus' teaching, he was convinced that it was the only solution capable of creating a lasting peace. He wrote, "The non-violent approach does not immediately change the heart of the oppressor. It first does something to the hearts and souls of those committed to it," which would be us. "It gives them new self-respect. It calls up resources of strength and courage that they did not know they had. Finally, it reaches the opponent and so stirs their conscience that reconciliation becomes a reality." If someone's angry and you get angry back, you just end up in an argument. If someone is violent and you're violent back, it just ends up in a fight. The question that Jesus and Martin Luther King confront us with is not an easy one. The temptation to demand revenge. I'm entitled, he did wrong, or she did wrong and I'm entitled to have my revenge. It's strong. No one is suggesting that people who do wrong, people who break the law, shouldn't be punished. The challenge to forgive them is still there. Perhaps being forgiven will change them, perhaps it won't. But one thing is certain: the act of forgiving those who do us wrong, whoever they are, will change us. And I just want to remind you, every single one of us has done wrong. No matter how hard we try, we are human. Every now and then we're going to mess up, sometimes by mistake, sometimes on purpose. And that can cause a problem between us and God, that can stop us from getting close to him. And Jesus came and Jesus went through the most awful, awful punishment for something that he hadn't done, to take the punishment for the things that we have. And so we can go to God and ask for forgiveness. And it doesn't matter what we've done, it doesn't matter how bad it is. If we're truly sorry, we can take it to God and tell him that we're sorry, and we will be forgiven. So Jesus not only talked about it, he did it. He loves us, he forgives us. And if you haven't already spoken to him to say sorry for the things you've done, today would be a really great day to do it. See you soon.